Good evening. Welcome to our live stream event tonight, Inventing Authenticity with Denis Dehart. I'm Rebecca Stahl with WSU Global Campus Connections, and I'll be your moderator for tonight's event. Just a reminder about tonight's event, you can bump up your video quality by clicking on the HD in the bottom of your player for high definition view. And please do log into the chat and let us know who you are, where you're located, and any questions that you have for Denis. We'll be taking questions all night, and we need you in that chat box to know what you're thinking. This event is an interactive conversation, so I can't stress that enough. Our instructor today is fine art photographer and WSU professor, Denis Dehart.
Howdy.
Nice to have you here. Denis's fine art photographs and interdisciplinary projects are compelled by the connections, conflicts, and intersections of the natural and cultural worlds. The works are project-based and often weave together stylistic observation with personal voice. Experiencing place through experiential participation is an important conceptual component to the work. His work has been exhibited in a diversity of venues, including group and solo shows regionally, nationally, and internationally. Denis has received his MFA in photography from the University of New Mexico. I encourage all of you to check out his website, denisdehart.com, and the WSU photography blog, where you can find out all the fun things his department is up to. So throughout the presentation, we'll be stopping to take questions and comments. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and hand the metaphorical mic over to Denis here.
All right,
Thank you.
So, welcome everybody. I do encourage you to ask questions tonight. This is a participatory event. So with that, I'm going to get started. First off, I want to distinguish today why this class is within the context of fine art. I think it's important. Photography is one of these animals that kind of crosses a lot of disciplines, but I'm rooted in the fine arts department, and so I teach with sculptures, painters, installation, and new media. You know, innately, what distinguishes a fine art photographer is context, and you could say that about most of photography. It defines where it goes, what sort of venues it ends. The title for tonight kind of comes out of this idea of authenticity, that in photography, how we kind of construct that. Innately, photography in the 1970s, until the 1970s, wasn't actually thought of as an art form. It tended to be relegated as documentary and other sorts of journalism and such. And in the 1970s, photography sort of entered the canon of fine art. And so now photography is pretty inundated in the art world and museums and galleries. But tonight we're going to do fairly conventional photography, but I want to talk about what distinguishes this animal of fine art and give some suggestions and points about that. One of the things I really think about with photography is this idea of making versus taking a picture. Making a picture I tend to think of is more active, more engaged, while taking a picture tends to be more passive. So let me unpack that a little bit. When we make something, we tend to construct, we tend to have an experience with that, we tend to be engaged. When we're passively taking a picture, we're sort of going through the environment, sort of not really aware of what we're doing. In fact, we're looking through our viewfinder as opposed to looking through our eyes. So I think one of the strengths of learning about fine art photography in particular is learning how to be an active photographer, an engaged photographer, one who's engaged in making photography as opposed to a passive photographer. As a teacher, I actually really try to stress that to my students at all levels, how to be engaged. Some things I want to talk about this idea of fine art photography also is distilling some of the elements of photography. So let me talk about that a little bit, and then we're going to look at some books, and then we'll actually shoot some photographs tonight. So photography innately, when we talk about the basic design of photography, we're talking about form. But form isn't just photographs, of course. It's also relegated to drawing, sculpture, painting, new media, graphic design. And form innately is sort of qualities of light, composition, rhythm, texture, all these different elements that sort of what we use, the grammar of photography. I like to use this analogy of grammar, sort of like nouns, verbs, adjectives. We use that grammar in order to articulate our ideas. Also within photography, we have craft. And craft typically means the tools of photography. We'll be shooting digitally tonight, and I'll talk a little bit about the tools we're using. When we talk about the craft of photography, we're talking, often I tend to think of the tools we're using, the medium we're using, the kinds of tools, how we articulate sort of this formal elements into a visual, technical way. Within that, we also have the conceptual underpinnings of photography, and that's really your ideas. What is your photography about? What's your point of view? What's your content? And then, of course, the emotion in photography. I think we all identify with pictures for different reasons. We laugh, we cry, we identify with photographs humanistically. And so emotion is obviously really important to photography. So today, talking sort of these elements of what I sort of call a memorable photograph, and a memorable photograph is a term I took from my colleague in upstate New York when I taught at SUNY Buffalo, is a photograph that sort of rises above just sort of passive consumption, but is a photograph that is memorable, photograph that is one that you're going to come back and look at again and again. So today, our craft is going to be using a medium format digital camera and this light setup we have here, which I'll talk a little more about in a moment. Then also we're going to, the concept we're using tonight is models. We're going to be engaged. They're going to be, it's portraiture. It's going to be light. It's going to be energetic. It's going to be fun. This is a demonstration. And then, of course, the emotion, well, that was the emotion. I would say the concept is, of course, demonstrating what we're doing tonight as a live educational opportunity. What I want to emphasize most importantly tonight is the quality of light in photography. I think innately, lighting is what distinguishes quality of photography and distinguishes an important element to that photography. And lighting comes in all kinds of contexts. Of course, we have outdoor lighting, natural lighting. Tonight we'll be using artificial lighting. These are daylight balanced electronic strobes that mimic the quality of daylight. And we'll talk a little more about that. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the tools we're going to use, and then we will look at some images, and then we'll get started with the models. So tonight we're going to be using a medium format digital camera. This is a Mamiya 645. It is a Japanese-made body with a Leaf digital back. That is, Leaf is an Israeli-made company in Israel, I should say. And then we have a lens, a Schneider lens made in Germany. So this is what you might call a composite camera. Its ability to connect different elements to this camera. This is a medium format digital camera, and for those of you more technically inclined, it's 28 megapixel. So it's not a particularly big megapixel camera, but it has a large sensor, and that's what distinguishes the quality of this camera. We're also going to be using radio transmitters. I have a radio transmitter attached to the hot shoe on this camera, and then we have a receiver which is attached to what I would call our key light over here. A little more about this camera. We're going to be shooting in RAW tonight. I always shoot in RAW, and in fact this camera only gives you the option of RAW. And then our color space is Adobe RGB for, again, those of you more technically minded. Now it's really important to shoot in this color space because it gives you a longer color gamut. And then of course RAW is what is equivalent to a digital negative. With that, we'll also be using a light meter to measure our light. This is a Sekonic light meter that we can use to measure the different lights. I've actually taken the liberty of taking my light reading adjustments. So we'll skip that part, but I did want to let you know about that. And, you know, some questions that I'll preemptively answer, but I hope you ask more, is I'm going to be shooting with an ISO of 50 tonight. That was a question that was asked before. Our exposure actually in this environment will be around f8 at 1/125th of a second, which again has to do with that ISO. So let me just show you a little bit about the lights here. This actually here, we're using a Calumet strobes. Calumet is a company based in Chicago. I'm not trying to sell you strobes tonight, but there's a lot of different camera manufacturers. There's 750 watt, there are 3 of them. This is my key light, which has what's called a softbox on here. This is my secondary or fill light, which actually has a silver umbrella on there. And then we have a backlight with a red gel on it with a flag in front of it actually to diffuse it. Now, often photographers don't mix umbrellas and softbox. I've chosen to do that partly for the demonstration tonight. There's all kinds of configurations. I'm using the basic, most simple lighting setup I can do tonight for simplicity of the demo. Again, this radio transmitter will talk to this radio receiver over here, which will fire these strobes. So let's take a moment and sort of switch gears, because I think as a photographer, it's important to, I like to think interdisciplinary with my photography. I like to draw inspiration from different sources. And talking about being an art photographer, you know, where do you go for inspiration? Where do you go for sources? And so I brought in a few books tonight that I wanted to just show you. I think photography books are still alive and well. Often you can see a lot of photography online. The first book I brought in was Girl Culture by Lauren Greenfeld. Lauren Greenfeld's a wonderful photographer who most recently made the independent documentary called Queen of Versailles. Anyway, this book is a lot about what it sounds like, female identity in contemporary culture. I'm going to shoot through these pretty fast because we've got a lot to do, but I encourage you to go out and seek some of these books, or maybe just Google her online. Anyway, this is a great book. She's done several books. Again, it's about sort of contemporary female identity. What's great about this book, too, is I do consider it a form of portraiture, and that's what we're going to be doing tonight. And so, you know, I brought some of these books in, particularly for our first shoot, to get some inspiration for the models. The second book I'm going to bring in, show you is Face, the New Photographic Portrait. I always like books that are new. So what's that make books that say they were new in the 1970s? I'm not sure. But the first photographer I want to show you is Susan Upton. These are actually portraits of returning vets from Iraq. And there's a great quote on this page. It says, "When I look at your little photo, I'm always astonished by the force which ties us together. Behind all there is to contemplate, behind the cherished face, act forces which are so near and dear and so indispensable to me. All of it is a real mystery in which the tiny creatures that we are must collapse in total submission." And that's Franz Kafka. Anyway, a lot of these photographs I've actually seen in print, which really makes a big difference than seeing them in a little photo book. But again, this is Susan Upton. And then we have another photographer, Laurent Moller. Actually, I'm not familiar with their work, but I thought it was interesting. And another quote: "Photography pretends to show reality. With your technique, you have to go as near to reality as possible in order to imitate reality. And when you come so close, when you recognize that, at the same time, it is not." And that's Thomas Ruff, who's a German photographer. So I'll show you just a few more books, and actually we'll get going with our demo. Another artist I brought in is Robert Mapplethorpe. He's a wonderful black and white photographer who passed away quite a long time ago now. Here's you know, he's a very provocative photographer. I will warn you in case you're a little bit squeamish, but he does amazing portraits. Here's another portrait. Again, this is Robert Mapplethorpe. And just a few more. We have Richard Avedon. And I really love this portrait. This is Louise Bourgeois, who's a sculptress. And then this is from his Portraits of the West. And these portraits each have names of the models he's photographing. And of course, these are not professional models. These are people that he went out with his 8x10 camera and photographed. And lastly, a contemporary traveling show right now that I actually saw this at the SF MoMA last year, and it's traveled to the Guggenheim. This is Reneke de Dijkstra. I probably said her name wrong. This is a retrospective of her work. She does a lot of different kinds of portraits. This is, of course, color. This is a full body portrait here. This is, she does a lot of different sections of people. For example, that was this particular series was young people on the beach. This is bullfighters after the bullfighting. And then, of course, or not of course, we have these soldiers in sort of their everyday clothes and then their military garb. So I can't stress enough looking at photography, and I think there's a lot of ways. That's what's exciting about the internet nowadays, is there's a lot of ways to look at photography in books, on the internet, in museums and galleries. I can't stress enough that looking at a print of a photograph, to me, is still, I would like to argue, probably the most interesting way to view a photograph, because there's really just you and the print. There's no intermediary. But with that, let's move on to our demo tonight. All right. So let me clear this out real quick. Maybe this is a good time to have some questions. Do you have any questions there?
Well, one question is, you were talking a little bit about viewing the photograph in print. What do you think about the differences between in a gallery and just a print itself? How does that change the experience?
How a print is viewing it in a gallery as opposed to
a print,
just a picture laying around?
Yeah.
Well,
do you get where I'm going with that?
Yeah, no, I get that.
Does it make it better or more artistic because we see it in that setting?
It comes back to the idea of context. And so viewing a photograph in a gallery, generally it's a white space, it's a neutral space, that there's not a lot of distraction besides the photograph. Mm-hmm. And sort of the frame is the sort of classic. Now, there's all ways to view photographs, and that's something that we haven't really got into. We're kind of taking a very conventional approach tonight. The gallery may choose to do an installation of photographs. The gallery may choose to make single prints on the wall. They may choose to even use video as a form of photography, which I would argue is a form of photography. I think innately it comes back to this idea of context. It's a space for the viewing specifically of that photograph or that media or that art. And so, yeah, it is very different than looking at a print in this room, for example, because the context is different, the space is different, the ambience is different, it's designed, and I'm speaking very generalized, every space is different, but yeah, it's very important, I think, to view photography in museums, in galleries, in the print, in as many different ways as you can. So,
yeah, it seems like these days we're sort of inundated with photography, and it seems like we see it online, on Facebook, everywhere, and then in the gallery sort of exalts it in a way.
Sure.
It might be the same photo, but
sure,
in that different setting.
Excellent. All right, do we have any more questions, or should we just jump in?
No questions.
All right, now we're going to work on our demo. So we're going to get our first model. So would you introduce yourself, please, and tell us a little bit about you? You're going to get the mic.
Hello, I'm Andrea. I'm a student with the AMTD department, which is basically the fashion school where I do history of clothing and have a slight obsession with the Victorian era.
All right, thanks, Andrea. So we're going to get started tonight. Now, I like to tell our little live right off. We actually pre-shot some of these photographs. We could do a live tether, but it was just another layer of technology that we didn't want to deal with. So if you start to see little inconsistencies like, hey, that's not the shirt we see in that photograph, you'll know. I probably shouldn't have told you and let you figure it out yourself, but anyway. So we're going to get started. So I'm going to talk a little bit about technically how we have it set up, and then we're going to just take some photographs. So the first thing I talked about is this idea of a key light. So when we set up 3 lights, I have what would be called my main source light. If you were outside, that would be the sun. And here, it's this light with the softbox and sort of the cockeyed softbox. I actually want to straighten that, but I may ruin the camera angle. Did I do that? Nope. All right, good. We have this secondary light back here. Now, I put a red Jill on it, partly for a little dramatic affect, and also to separate it a little bit from the black background. And for this first shot, I actually turned off this light here. Now, how do you approach taking a picture? I think that's a interesting question in itself. A lot of people, you just start shooting. That's one approach. Talking to your model, getting comfortable with your model, building a rapport. We've had a rapport here, so we may be a little more comfortable than if I just met you 5 minutes ago. But there's all kinds of strategies. I think every photographer is going to have a different strategy, different resources. Context, again, will shape that. We're just going to get started. So the first shot we're going to do is, again, with this 2 lights. So we'll go ahead and do that. Thank you. All right. Ooh, got to turn on my camera. All right. Still got to turn it on. Probably should have done that before. Oh, there's the sound. All right. Okay. innately, this animal is a little bit technical, and there's always going to be some sort of little goof. And I'm making, there we go. All right. We did test it, but all right. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. We're not going yet. There we go. Got to work out the kinks here. You know, one thing I can suggest about any time you photograph is always have a secondary plan, a backup plan, particularly if it's a high pressure shoot where people are really counting on you. Equally test your equipment beforehand. We have, but as you can see even then. So, all right, 1, 2, 3. So I'm not actually really directing you right now, which is good. I'm just letting you be who you are, which I kind of like. All right, so.
First 2 shoots.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah. Are you running a little low energy today? Yeah, it is Thursday. On Tuesday, you should have saw us. Boy, we were on fire on Tuesday. So, all right, 1, 2, 3. Excellent. Now, can you do, we've got this first shot, which I really like. I'm going to change a few of my exposures. Now, on these lights, I want to say you can adjust the power on these lights. So these strobes actually have a different power. And as I said, I've already metered this. I have a different, well, this one's not even on, so I shouldn't change the power on that one. So I can change my exposure in my camera. I can also change the power on my strobes to give more light. So right now I'm giving a little more light. Now, another tip actually for photographing anywhere is exposing for the highlights. In digital photography, particularly information or loss of information in the highlights is really problematic. It's hard to get it back if it's not there. So I'm going to take a few more and then we'll change our setup. 1, 2, 3. Well, we're having a little goof again. Don't worry, I have a second camera if we have a 1, 2, 3. It likes to keep me on my toes here. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Excellent. All right, so now we're going to add our secondary light here. Now we're going to actually fill this in. So this first light, our primary source was on this side, but we have no fill light. So when we look at the images, we'll see that there's going to be a bit of shadow. Now we have a secondary light. We still have the red light back there. So why don't you do turn, and as we were talking, you have such beautiful hair. I want to photograph from the side, and we'll actually see, take a few from this. Excellent. I like we're recreating this one. Excellent. So you can see we're a little sluggish on this one right now. We'll get going a little more. We're moving them pretty slow, but there's no hurry. 1, 2, 3.
They are wondering a little bit more about your setup, Dennis.
Sure.
What's the camera setup right now, and are you tethered? Which I believe is no.
I am not tethered right
Yes.
now. As I said, we could tether, but it requires another person to operate another computer. And there's a
Right.
lot of, it's a download and things. So what I'm going to do is I'll pause here in a moment and we'll show some examples of
Okay.
this same setup. So 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. All right, thank you. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the image here. We have one more shot I'm going to look at. We're going to now just take a few look at these images here. So we have the first here. Do we have this up now? So see? So we have the first image here with the light off on the left side. And you can see how there's a shadow and we have the red sort of rim around her face. We can see that we have good highlights. There's detail in those highlights. Andrea has a light skin, which is very reflective of the light, which is nice. You also want to be careful with somebody with light skin of not losing the detail in that highlights. The next photograph we look at is the back photo we just took. And we can see how by shifting that perspective, it really emphasizes her hair, a lovely profile. I think this is a really strong photograph of her. And we also can see that we've actually used that secondary light to sort of fill in the left side. So we have kind of even lighting. If we would have turned off the, not had that fill-in light, we would actually have shadow on her face, which wouldn't be particularly complimentary. And here we have just an even photograph. We can see how it's even across. There's no real shadows. This is a very sort of what I'd like to call a typological photograph, or maybe think your grade school portrait, sort of using even lighting. We could drop a nice scenery in the background and a big smile. Now, if we look at these three photographs, we can see that particularly the first and second one have a little more drama, a little more of this inventing authenticity, this idea that we're using a real model, but we're also stylizing it. We're giving it sort of an artistic twist. Now, are these art photographs? I'm not going to really debate that tonight. They're not really designed to be in art context. We're shooting portraits. But I am thinking like an artist. I'm shooting about the negative space. We have a black backdrop. I'm looking at the textures of the hair. I'm thinking about the colors. But ultimately, where I put these photographs and how I display them will perhaps determine if they're actually ultimately a piece of art. So let's go back to here. Now let's get our next model up here. And let's introduce yourself. Let's step out of the frame here.
Good evening. My name is Pat. I teach organic chemistry, and then part-time I do gentleman farming. We have 20 sheep and 20 goats, plus a few kids. And Andrea is my daughter.
All right. Thanks, Pat. So we're going to try something a little different right now. We're going to give this mic over.
I'll turn it off just in time for you want to use it.
Thank you.
This time, we're going to just actually look at the photos we're going to do first and recreate them. So we're going to shake it up a little bit. So here we have, we're using a green gel. So we're going to put that green gel on. You can see here on this green gel, it makes him look kind of like an alien. No, I'm kidding. But we can see that we're using it as a background and giving a green sort of rim around the shirt. Now, it's kind of a fun effect. I think it gives a little bit of theatric to the photo. It gives a little bit of character to it. It lightens it up a little bit. Definitely the green does that. So what we're going to do is we're going to sort of reproduce this image now. So what I'm going to do is over here, I'm going to take the red gel off and put the green gel on. And we're going to get Pat a chair to sit down, because we can see here. Oh, you got yourself a chair? Yeah, we make them work here, the models. So no extras here. No, yeah. All right. So with this, I'm going to get, and we're going to do a few tests. And my camera is acting a little funky right now. You know, it wouldn't be a proper demo if there wasn't some technical problems.
It's got its own personality.
It does have a lot of personality. So if we need to, I'll switch cameras. But 1, 2, 3. Excellent. All right. Now, one thing I'm seeing right now is this light is way too bright and a little dominating. Also, Pat, could you move back from me a little bit? Sure. Thanks. So to recreate this image, we need a little more closer to this green source. I also am going to turn up this green light a little more to give a little more of that fill that we liked. And I'm also going to turn this one off. Oh, boy. All right. So now we're going to try it again. We're in the dark with all lights behind us, by the way. All right. Thanks. All right. Now, 1, 2, 3. Excellent. All right, now we're a little dark, so I'm going to turn this up. Now, of course, you can't see this live right now, but I do want you to know that I'm adjusting the power to adjust for the light. Other photographers actually could adjust their aperture and ISO, and these lights give me that ability. Now, again, I'm shooting with an f8, which is sort of a mid aperture. As close as I am, it actually blurs the edges of the photograph a little bit. So if we... 50. ISO 50. And in fact, we'll take one more here, just so you know that I really set it up right. Or at least I know. Got it, you know, that authenticity. Did he really get that shot? Because we already shot him before, right? So I'm going to go over here. We're going to look at the next photo. I did really get that shot. Okay. Here we have a much closer up of Pat. And now notice I took the green gel off on this one. And also the lighting is more even. I actually really like this portrait. I want you to look closely at the sort of short depth of field on this. You can see that the ears are sort of soft, and that the critical point of focus is actually on the glasses. Now, somebody asked about how last time you keep the reflection on the glasses, and there's several strategies to that. One is to take them off. That's my favorite. The second one is to position the lights in such a way that you don't quite get that reflection. You can see the umbrellas in the glasses. but they're not particularly distracting. Sometimes the reflection can totally distort the eyes. Also look very closely at the eyes there. You have two umbrellas within the eyes that kind of give them a little bit of a luminosity, a little moisture in the eye. You really want that. Now, I really like this portrait. I'm going to recreate this again, and you'll note that I am really close on this picture. So I'm really getting in Pat's space. So fortunately, he trusts me, or I hope. He hasn't kicked me yet, but he does have goats, so he knows about kicking. So, all right. So, headbutt me. All right. So this time, I'm going to do a test. Now, you know, there's all kinds of tricks and tools. Now, notice I'm photographing and talking, and often I photograph and talk to my models at the same time. Or I don't often photograph models per se. I photograph real people. But often I'm talking to them, making them...
I'm a real person.
Well, yes, but you're a model tonight. But I mean, I meant that more environmental portraits where I'm actually out photographing strangers a lot of times. Like I ask them, and then I talk to them for a while, actually, why I'm photographing. So I actually have a conversation with them. And usually that lets them relax a little bit and kind of not pose. Because innately, what I'm looking for is non-posy pictures. Posy, is that a word? I don't know. But what I'm looking for is pictures that are a little more, I like to say a little bit between staged and natural, if you like. And I do lean more towards natural, if you like. And when I say natural, just less posy, less self-conscious, less more aware, if you like. So let's try this again. Let's see, 1, 2, 3. Excellent. So again, I will adjust the lights accordingly to get this. So I'm going to adjust the light a little bit here because I'm trying to get an even luminosity. So innately, because I'm using two different light modifiers, the light's not going to be exact. It's going to be pretty darn close. And if we look at the picture, it is pretty darn close. But a lot of, somebody else may use actually two softbox or two umbrellas, but we have a fairly even lighting, and you can see how it's spaced. And then we have sort of the same power on each. So we're going to take a few more. 1, 2, 3. Excellent. Now this is where I get close. Let's see if he kicks me. 1, 2, 3. Excellent. That was a good one. I like that one. I also like, again, I'm really close. I like Pat. Now let's try, just talk, you know, so tell me about, how many goats do you have, Pat?
We have 20 goats.
20, wow.
Plus kids coming.
Interesting. How many kids do you have coming?
We have, presuming each goat has 2, we have another 8 coming.
Oops.
And there's 10 currently.
Interesting. Thank you. Now, you can see I was engaging him in a conversation. Now, often I don't get good photographs doing that because they're pausing, they're in mid-sentence. But what I am doing is trying to get him to relax, trying to get him to talk about himself, trying to actually have another dialogue, which innately when I say, okay, let's take a picture, you're a little more relaxed, you're a little more comfortable. And so something I brought up actually, now I'll turn towards the camera finally. Something I brought up last time is the innate power of a camera. And a camera can come, you know, there's all kinds of different relationship with the camera, from the height of the camera, the view, point of view, and that's something we call. Now, what happens if I photograph from a low vantage point? It totally changes our perspective. And so we would call this the vantage point. So I'm going to shoot from down here. Now, on a technical level, I don't like this because I don't get my full black background in here, so I'd probably never shoot this. Also, we're shooting up Pat's nose here, which maybe is not the most flattering at this point. But no, let's just try it just to see. Now, I move around a lot as a photographer. I move my body a lot, and I use it physically. And a lot of people tend to photograph from away and use lenses and zooms. The famous war photographer Kappa said, if you're not close enough, you're not good enough. And I think the idea is there's a certain authenticity, which is a dangerous word when you're actually interacting with your subject. When you're back, you're somewhat detached, you're somewhat aloof. I'm not a photojournalist, I'm not a war photographer, I'm actually really interacting with my subjects. And so having a conversation, moving my body around, changing my body position, towering over Pat probably is going to make him a little uncomfortable if I come a little down like that, you know. So anyway, let's do our last photo of this, and then we'll get the father-daughter duo together. Did we mention their father-daughter duo? Oh, there's only 2, so we jumped ahead. So let's get our father-daughter duo in here. All right, she gets to sit. That's right, recreating these photos. So you can see here that now we have this great dynamic, and aren't they a wonderful father-daughter? Now, on Tuesday we looked at some pictures and we got some ideas, and maybe part of the ideas were the photographer, part of the ideas was for our subjects. One thing I wanted to do with this is maybe play a little bit with the different poses and different relationships. So we have this one where they're standing together. We'll look at the other two and then we'll come back. We have this one where they're even, and then the final one is sort of on the back. So most of these here are fairly even lighting. I haven't done a lot of creative lighting. There's no gels on there. It's a fairly conventional setup because now I'm actually interested in their relationship. And I don't really feel like I need to put a lot of drama in it. I'm more interested in sort of a genuine lighting here. So let's give it a try here. All right, I'm going to back up. 1, 2, 3. Now, let's see. On that one, you looked down, you looked up. Can we do that again for me? Now, that looks a little posed, right? Because we're no, I'm just saying, because we're trying to mimic something we've already done. So it kind of takes the spontaneity out of that. Now, innately, that's why photographers photograph a lot. They're trying to get depending on their vision, their ideas, they're trying to get something they have in mind. So for me, what I have in mind is I want something that's a little more fluid, a little less stagey, a little less posed. But yet, I still want that sort of almost posed feel. And it's a weird ambiguity that only I understand in my little brain. So anyway, and it is pretty little. So all right, 1, 2, 3. Whoa. All right, excellent. All right, now let's go to our next shot. How are we doing on time, by the way?
We're doing good.
Yeah?
We've got about 23 minutes.
Oh, we're moving fast today,
Yeah.
aren't we? Woohoo!
You're booking it.
We're cruising today. We're picking up speed today. So, all right. Now our next shot here, we have them together, kind of on the same plane, same height. All right. I like the arm crossing. Okay. All right. Yeah, you guys. Oh, I like it. All right. All right. Excellent. 1, 2, 3. Woo! That was my camera being weird again today. 1, 2, 3. Aren't they cute? So she didn't like that one. Oh, I used the word cute.
Not a word to use commonly.
Well, no, it's important. You've got to be able to read your subjects a little bit too, right? Like cute was not a word that you liked, right? So no, that's good.
Associate with myself.
No, and see, and as a photographer, you sometimes have to be a little bit conscious of that, a little bit sensitive to what words are. And so, I don't normally use word cute. I kind of did that to see what would happen because you were like, whoa, kind of made you uncomfortable. So, there's all kinds of tactics. And there is an element of power when we're photographing here, which is interesting. So let's take a few more. Now I'm going to back up a little bit. All right, and do more of a full body. By the way, I'm using an 80 millimeter lens for those of you interested in that. 1, 2, 3. And 1, 2, 3. Now again, let's just refresh real quick about our lights. We're using our main source light here, which is a 750 watt electronic strobe. We have a secondary light here, which I'm using as a fill light, which makes a fairly even light. What I'm going to do now is actually I'm going to turn on this backlight. I'm going to take the gel off. And the reason I use this light, that was very technical, is this will separate somewhat the background from the foreground. Now that's something in photography we think about or in painting, foreground, background. Also negative space around your subjects. Also separating the foreground from the background. Now, if you move the subjects closer away from the background, you will get less texture in the background. If I push you guys back to the background, you're going to get more texture in there. Now, I want this to seem black in the background. I don't want texture, so I'm going to bring you actually a little closer. Oh, no, too far. No. Now, also another trick you can use is marks on your footing. So, for example, we shot this, and I really wanted to get you back where we could mark it. So, all right, we're going to shoot a few more. 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Wouldn't be a demo without a little difficult there. 1, 2, 3. Excellent. All right, so I'm going to turn these power lights down. They're still a little powerful. Turn this down. I'm actually going to turn these way down. Now, something I talked about earlier, we're going to take a break, or take a moment is metering. Now, most of you have meters in your camera, and metering is really critical. Now, with digital, the great thing about digital, unlike film, which I learned on, is you get an instant feedback. Now, that instant feedback can be really useful if you know how to read it. Often photographers, particularly studio photographers or photographers who need really accurate readings, use these animals called light meters. And so this is a light meter. We would plug it into our strobe over here. We'll take a light meter reading. So I'm going to do that right now since we've got the time. We're going to take a light reading. Now, this light meter is a Sekonic light meter. It's designed for reflective and incident reading. So reflective reading is where you take the light reading from the subject. Actually, incident reading is where you take the light falling on the subject, like this. And we can see I just took a reading. This is telling me 5/6 at 60th with a 50 ISO. All right? A reflective reading, would be changing our dome here and actually reading the light that falls on your subject. Now, an incident reading is technically more accurate than a reflective reading because, for example, you have, fair skin. Now, the light is actually bouncing off that and telling your camera a little different than what's actually there. So it's kind of fibbing a little bit. Experienced photographer would know that, interpret that. Now, this incident reading actually gives you a much more accurate reading because it's telling you the light that actually is falling on the subject. Now, another thing that you can do, a lot of cameras you have different options, is this has a spot meter in it. Spot meters are often used for landscape photography where you can meter specific, I should look at you guys, you can look through it and meter specific parts of the scene. Now, most people with a standard DSLR, digital single lens reflex camera, would have that built in. And in fact, if you look in your manual, it's probably about 6 different options. So what I'm going to do is, you can also, when I do this, the one thing I am doing is you want to point this towards your camera and you don't want to be in the light. So the last 2 times I took that, I was in the light, so it was an inaccurate reading. So I'd point it like that. Oh, look at that, it changed my reading because I was blocking the light there, all right? Now, I could also point it like this. I'm going to read from my subject. Excuse me, sorry. You can't get in your face. Going to read it. They're going to be blind. We go like this. And what I'm doing is I was measuring the light, how it falls off. And interesting enough, the light over here was darker than the light over here. There was a 2-stop difference. For those of you who are really technically savvy, 2 stops is actually a fairly big difference. That's technically 4 times as much light. Now, oddly enough, when I look at my camera, I don't necessarily see that. So the eye sometimes on the back, looking at the back of your camera isn't as accurate as one of these tools, and that's why we'd use one of these. Again, this is called a light meter. This one in particular is a Sekonic, and it's a great resource for certain things.
What do you do about a 2-stop?
Well, I might adjust my lights to even it out. Good question. Or by the flip side, that's a great question actually. I like that. Giving a little bit of light difference actually gives a little bit of volume to the photograph. A little darker on this side actually, and a little over here. Most of the naked eye is probably 1 stop when I get down to it. We're not going to really notice it, and I can adjust it in RAW. But it does give maybe a little more texture, a little more definition. Stereotypically or historically, if we think back to old Hollywood films, they used to actually light women with really soft, high-key lighting, and they lit men with really hard side lighting. Because the side lighting would give the men sort of a rugged, manly feel, and the woman is sort of a light, airy feel.
I want that.
You want that? You want the light, airy feel? Or the, no, and I'll give you the slight, yes, no. So this is where you can also use lighting to create a certain effect. And actually, it's not going to do either because I have a softbox on it. But nonetheless, we could modify that and take off that light, and it would give more texture. Also notice that light is actually starting to move over to the side. Last time we had it a little more even there. So the position of the lighting we're looking at is different. These are not evenly spaced like they were. We've been moving things around. I had a grad student in here earlier doing critique. So the tools have migrated. So we could move them back in line. So why don't we do a few more photographs, and then do we have any questions here?
Yes, we have another question about the glasses. I
The
think
glasses.
people are,
I didn't
yes,
answer that. I did stop, didn't I?
they keep coming up.
The glasses. Oh.
We're wondering if you're, if you're paying much attention to that glare while you're shooting, or do you deal with that in post production ever, or?
That's a good question, and I think there's a couple strategies to deal with it. I've always found fixing glasses in post-production is kind of a pain, so I prefer to minimize it, and that's actually a good question in general. All the digital tools we have right now are pretty cool, pretty amazing, but I still like to try to minimize my digital labor if I don't have to, like spending time spotting, taking reflection out of the glasses, all that. I'd rather be doing something more interesting, like taking more photographs or doing compositing. So I try to minimize things like that. Equally, sometimes you just got reflection in, can't do anything about it. But so with the reflection in the eye, you can also use a polarizer. I think I neglected to mention that. A polarizer is designed to minimize reflection. Often you can use those on water, on sky. A lot of landscape photographers use polarizers. Basically, they fit on your lens, they rotate, and if you rotate them, you'll start to see they minimize the reflection. The other thing I said is take the lenses out of the glasses. Sometimes fashion photographers do that. You don't want to do that. But let's say you were photographing a large volume of people with glasses or something, it may be a good strategy. It depends on your trade. And obviously, if your trade was photographing photographs or people photographing glasses or people with lots of glasses, you'd come up with all kinds of tricks and tools to minimize that. So with that, how you holding up there? Yeah, you guys look great. Thank you. You're right. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm joking. It's my job. So why don't I'm going to let you sit. You guys, I saw a little thing today that you use 50% more energy when you're standing than you do when you're sitting. I don't want you to do that. So let's sit. So. It is Thursday, isn't it? It's always like, So, do we have any more questions? All right.
Yes, we have a great question here and they say, outside of the invited dialogue here, what are some suggestions for bringing the model more into the room and diminishing that imposing power of the camera photographer?
Oh my gosh.
I know. Isn't that a great question?
That is a great question.
You have to have a great personality for the person taking the photo.
Yeah. Well, that's innately it's interesting. You can imagine if you were photographing the President of the United States. I think the power would quickly shift. There's a photographer, Martin Schiller, who photographs for Time, probably photographed anybody like celebrity-wise or important people. So why I say the photograph has power, it probably really depends on your subject still too, to some degree. With that, if I was photographing somebody like that, I think my dynamics would be very different. At that level, you probably have a couple assistants. You probably have people working to get your models relaxed. At this level, a little more modest, I would say, talking to your models, getting them relaxed. I think gender to some degree plays a role. Personality, of course. I think asking people questions, just general good manners. It's like humanistic qualities that we all appreciate. Ultimately, when I'm photographing, I'm a professional, and I think that's also, there's a lot of art photographers whose sort of narrative, documentary style blends into this personal style, and obviously you can tell that those are more interpersonal, and they get something much different than here. So, obviously, when I'm photographing my family, it's very different than photographing strangers. Also, these two I've been working with now for a couple days, so we're all like, we've done this if we see them a little bit. That's a really good question. And any other questions for us?
That's all I have right now.
All right. So with that, why don't we do a few more shots? I don't feel like we've quite got the shots we did before, but why don't we review a little bit what we did over the last few days? So we began with the first shot here where we had a first light, a single light with a fill light and filling in that red. Then we had behind and looking and two lights, sort of an even lighting. And then we had a little bit of a red to give a little bit of a contour. And then we had sort of a straightforward, even lighting. Here we used a green gel from behind and then a single light. Here we use two even lights. You can see that why we do have reflections in the glasses, they're fairly minimized. Part of that is the softbox, part of that's the angle, part of that is the angle of the camera. Am I conscious? Somebody asked about that. I am somewhat conscious of the glasses, but if it's apparent when I review it, obviously I would try to correct for it, but you can't catch everything. And then here we have an even sort of more about the dynamics of our two models, our father-daughter models. And then sort of the back shot. So with that, have we done our back shot yet? Or we need you two to hug. We need you two. So we'll finish off our shoot here with this final image here. Now,
Do you ever use glasses as part of an element of the photograph, intentionally getting reflections?
oh, that's interesting. That's a good point. In fact, I almost picked out a photograph tonight where the artist actually used the reflections for the portrait. And so all the photographs actually had, the photographs, you couldn't see the eyes because of the angle of the lens, so the way they were angled. And I thought it was a very witty way of doing portraits. It's a great question. And I think we want to think about that. You know, portraiture is an interesting thing. I'm actually I do a lot of different things. I do landscape, portraiture, still life. And actually, working in the studio is something I do as a teacher, but I don't do as an art. It's not my chosen space, if you like. And I work in it, but I think each photographer would approach that would have a really different way of style. Why don't you two put your arms around each other for me? We'll see if we can get this shot. I love this shot here. Now we can see our model has a different shirt on tonight. I like that. Both of them do. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Oh, my camera decided to act a little problematic again. 1, 2, 3. Excellent. We're going to fix that again. 1, 2, 3. Ah. Give me a moment, please. You guys are like, hold that pose. Why don't you relax for a moment?
I was.
You were. You're getting close on time? All right, let's finish up. 1, 2, 3. Well, you know what? It was given that we're not going to get that shot tonight. So I would swap out another camera, but I actually, oddly enough, this is a very nice camera, but it's a little bit temperamental, and it's deciding to be a little temperamental tonight. So innately, I do have a secondary camera that I would use. So,
You like this camera better than the second one?
well, I like the quality of this camera, but I don't like the temperament. And oddly enough, this is a fairly expensive camera. So tools are tools, and like all kinds of things, innately, we're using tools. You know, we're using a tool to interpret the world. And what I like is the quality I get with these images, but I don't like the sort of temperamentalness that I've had with this camera. And so tonight it's deciding to be a little problematic. So with that,
Is the quality more depending on the lens or body or?
it's a mixture.
back,
It's
or-
partly the lens, it's partly the sensor on this camera. So again, this has a large sensor. It's a medium format digital camera. And the sensor has a very strong, sharp resolution, and that's what it does. The other camera I have is a DSLR, which is good, and it makes really nice pictures. But I tend to prefer this camera over that one, except when it's misbehaving, and then I don't. So,
Yeah, we do have a couple questions
All right.
here. So can the models relax?
all right, you can go away. All right.
So Tink here is asking if there's any general suggestions for landscape photographers.
Landscape photography. Yeah.
Big
Ooh,
question,
big
I know.
Question. Well, I said actually, you know, there's always so funny. There's always the rules, and then there's just doing it. And often, a lot of landscape photographers use polarizers because they sort of eliminate a lot of reflection. They saturate the color. What interests me about landscape is approaching it is for many reasons. I think for me right now, I'm sort of interested in sort of the landscape in its multiple histories, its multiple layers. And so I'm interested in those stories. So I'm not approaching landscape maybe like Ansel Adams, who looked at the landscape for its natural beauty and the formalist qualities, which are important, and I think there's a lot of value in that. I'm more interested personally in approaching the landscape both as a sort of a design problem, a visual sort of space to maybe solve visually through light, through line, through textures. But I'm also interested in the layers within that landscape, both nature and culture, both the things that perhaps happen historically or currently happening there. So you can see, coming back to this very idea of sort of multiple elements that I make a memorable photograph, you know, I'm looking at it from both the formal, from the conceptual, from the visual, and then from the technical. And so really, why I'm photographing a landscape, I'm trying to solve all those problems. And so my success rate is pretty low, actually. Now, different photographers use different cameras. A classic camera is an 8x10 film camera, which there's still a few photographers that use those. I actually use this medium format digital camera. Usually it behaves a little better. And I use a wide angle lens. That's another thing with landscape. I use a really wide angle lens, which actually creates depth. And one last thing with landscape, I also think a lot about the foreground and the background, what's in front of me and what's on the space. And I try to create depth again. So again, visually, I'm trying to solve those problems. So, other questions?
Yes, we have a question kind of going back to what you were talking to at the very beginning about some of those
That's a long
photographers
time
you
ago.
mentioned. We were wondering if we could get those names again.
Oh, thank you. Well, let's pull out the books. No,
Yeah, suggested photographers
you
to
know, the
check out.
photographers I showed tonight were Reneke de Dijkstra, who, if I'm not mistaken, is a Dutch photographer. I could be wrong on that. We looked at Lauren Greenwald, or Lauren Greenfeld, not Greenwald. Lauren was
Greenfeld.
actually a grad student I had. Lauren, little plug for Lauren there. And she's actually an American. We looked at, let me pull my books. We looked at another photograph by Susan Opton of the Iraqi veterans, the ones laying on the ground. Richard Avedon is another American photographer. I seem to be a little heavy on the American photographers tonight. Didn't mean that. That was kind of accidental. There's so many great photographers across the world. And in fact, I was fortunate to spend 5 weeks this summer in Finland and Sweden, and I actually got to see some really great Nordic photographers. And as a little plug for that, I actually am going to be inviting some Nordic photographers here to WSU in the fall to have an exhibition. So they will be here in October as a little plug for that. The other photographer I showed, I got to look at my books here, was Robert Mapplethorpe. And then there was one more, but that name escapes me. So.
Okay. And feel free to email us at global.connections@wsu.edu. I did put that email in the chat box there, and we can get those names for you. Some challenging spellings. I would be guessing on some of those spellings, so we can get you those names if you still would like to look those guys up. Any other questions? We'll squeeze them in here. We have one from OKC Thunder. Back and body of your camera.
What? Excuse me? What's
Back and body of the camera.
Oh, what is it technically?
Yes.
The back is a leaf back. It's leaf aptus, and it's made in Israel.
Okay.
The camera is a Mamiya 645, which is a Japanese-made camera.
Okay.
And they're medium format cameras.
Oh.
Oh, you want me to show you? Oh, that's a great idea. We're still learning. I'm still learning on this new format here.
We can see you.
So yeah, this is a medium format camera. And actually, if you look at that sensor on there you asked me about the quality. You can see that this sensor, that is your sensor, that if you popped over your DSLR is the size. It's also more of a rectangle, so it's a little different of a format. You can see that it's also basically a little computer. It's like a little scanner almost. And then you can see, here's the camera. You can see that with it off. And actually, the body is fairly simple. Like I said, this body is designed that it can take different parts. In fact, the lens I use on this camera is the landscape lens is about a 30-year-old lens. It's actually even older than that. It's like a 40-year lens. So this is actually a very modern camera. But I put older lenses. And that's something I actually talked about is a lot of photography is about quality of lenses, and the glass, as we call. And so we're using a German lens, German-made lens. Actually, it's a German company, but it was manufactured in Japan. But you can see what's great about this camera is I will be able to continue to expand it, to add and update it. A lot of contemporary cameras, they kind of expire, if you like. And so that's part of the built-in cost, I think, with this camera. And oddly enough, technology changes fast. This digital back is probably 2 or 3 years old, and it's already feeling its age because that innately is the technology. As you could see tonight, it It's having a little bit of problems freezing. And that has to do with the sophisticatedness comes some a little bit of problems and probably needs to be serviced, it sounds like. So camera maintenance, should we talk about that? No, I'm kidding. We were wind up. So.
Well, yeah, we were talking yesterday a little bit about investing in the lens. You know, if you're going to be putting money into equipment.
Sure.
Okay, well, I think it looks like a couple more people are typing here, which you're welcome to do so. Please continue to type in the chat box, exchange information, send me a note if you have additional questions. But I think that'll pretty much wrap us up.
All right.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at another Global Connections event. We are doing these seminars with faculty throughout the semester, so you can check out our website, connections.wsu.edu, for what's upcoming. So thank you so much for attending tonight.
Good night.